The massive lecture hall buzzed with excited chatter as alien cadets from across the galaxy filled the tiered seating. Professor Veltar stood at the podium, his crystalline skin catching the soft blue light that illuminated the circular chamber. His forearms moved gracefully as he prepared the holographic display system, each movement creating tiny sparkles across his translucent body. The Academy's most diverse class had gathered for today's special lesson. In the front rows, the furry Corvan cadets sat upright with their pointed ears twitching in anticipation. Their proud warrior heritage made them eager for any discussion of military tactics. Behind them, the insectoid SciFi clustered together, their compound eyes reflecting rainbow patterns as they whispered in their clicking language. The massive Draxon cadets occupied the reinforced seats in the back, their reptilian forms too large for standard furniture. Cadet Zixara leaned over to his fellow Corvan, Brixton, and grinned, showing his sharp canine teeth. "I heard we're studying primitive warfare today. Probably some amusing stick-fighting techniques from a backward planet." Brixton's whiskers twitched with amusement. "My grandfather told me stories of ancient Corvan battles fought with metal blades. These primitives probably haven't even discovered proper metallurgy yet." Near the middle section, Cadet Thrix adjusted her breathing apparatus nervously. The Etherean's pale blue skin seemed almost transparent under the lights, and her large dark eyes held a gentle expression. Her species had evolved past physical conflict thousands of years ago, preferring telepathic resolution of disputes. She attended these tactical courses only because Academy regulations required all cadets to understand military history. "Attention, cadets!" Professor Veltar's voice carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics. The chatter died down immediately. "Today marks a significant addition to our xenobiology curriculum. We have recently acquired extensive documentation of a newly contacted species from the Sol system." He gestured toward the holographic display with one of his lower arms. A three-dimensional star map appeared, zooming in to show a small yellow star with several orbiting planets. The species calls themselves humans, and they achieved faster than light travel approximately 3 centuries ago. While this makes them relatively new to galactic civilization, their planet shows evidence of organized warfare spanning several millennia. A collective murmur of interest rippled through the audience. Most species in the galaxy had developed peaceful solutions to conflict long before achieving space travel. The idea of a civilization reaching the stars while still maintaining active military traditions was unusual. The humans have provided us with extensive historical documentation of their military development. Veltar continued. Today, we will examine these records to understand how primitive species approach conflict resolution before developing more sophisticated methods. Cadet Morgax, one of the philosophical Voidborn, raised a tentacled appendage. His species existed primarily in zero gravity, so he floated in a special harness designed for the Academy's artificial gravity. "Professor, what level of technology should we expect? Basic projectile weapons? Primitive explosives?" "An excellent question," Veltar replied, his crystalline features brightening slightly. "The documentation spans from their earliest recorded conflicts using simple metal implements up through their pre-FTOA space age. We will observe the evolution of their tactical thinking over several thousand years." The Corvan cadets exchanged excited glances. Their own military history was a source of great pride, filled with tales of honorable single combat and glorious charges across open battlefields. They expected to see similar primitive versions in human warfare. "Before we begin," Veltar announced, "I should note that human physiology differs significantly from most galactic species. They are primarily bipedal, with relatively limited natural defenses. No natural armor, no venomous capabilities, no enhanced strength compared to their body mass. Cadet Drixka, a heavily armored shellback, clicked his mandibles in amusement. His species had evolved thick carapaces and natural weapons that made them formidable even without technology. How did such soft creatures survive long enough to develop civilization? That, Veltar said, with what might have been a smile on his alien features, is precisely what makes this study so fascinating. Despite their physical limitations, humans became the dominant species on their planet through what they term warfare. The lights began to dim as Veltar activated the holographic projectors. I must warn you that some imagery may be disturbing to species unaccustomed to violent conflict. However, understanding different approaches to resource competition is essential for future diplomatic and military considerations. Several Etherian cadets shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Their telepathic abilities made them sensitive to emotional content, and they could already sense an undercurrent of anticipation mixed with unease throughout the chamber. The human homeworld, which they call Earth, supported multiple competing civilizations throughout most of their recorded history. Veltar explained as images of blue and green landscapes appeared in the holographic display. Unlike most species that achieved global unity early in their development, humans maintained separate territorial groups for millennia. Cadet Nixara, a graceful Salanthi with flowing movements that resembled underwater dancing, found this concept puzzling. Her species had naturally formed collective consciousness shortly after developing agriculture. Professor, how did they coordinate resource distribution without unified leadership? They didn't, Veltar replied simply. When resources became scarce or territorial disputes arose, human groups would engage in organized violence to resolve the conflict. The winners would claim the disputed resources or territory. The concept seemed almost absurd to most of the assembled cadets. Every major galactic civilization had developed sophisticated arbitration systems, economic treaties, or democratic resource allocation methods thousands of years before achieving spaceflight. Surely they must have had some form of conflict resolution protocols, insisted Cadet Vexrian, whose crystalline quartz-born species communicated through harmonic frequencies that made deception nearly impossible. Some method of ensuring fair distribution? Veltar manipulated the controls, and the holographic display shifted to show what appeared to be primitive settlements surrounded by wooden barriers. The humans did develop various systems of governance and law. However, when those systems failed, or when different groups had incompatible goals, they would resort to what they called war. The word hung in the air with an alien quality. Most galactic languages had terms for conflict, but the human concept of organized, sustained violence between groups was so foreign that translators struggled to convey the proper meaning. Today's presentation will show you exactly what human war entailed, Veltar announced as he prepared to start the historical footage. I encourage you to observe not just their tactics, but their psychological responses to conflict. Understanding how different species approach survival challenges will make you better officers in the galactic fleet. The holographic display flickered to life, showing what appeared to be groups of humans carrying primitive weapons across a grassy field. The cadets leaned forward with curiosity, expecting to witness some crude but interesting historical artifact. None of them were prepared for what they were about to see. The holographic display came to life with scenes that immediately puzzled the alien cadets. Thousands of humans moved across ancient battlefields, their primitive armor glinting in sunlight. At first, the footage seemed almost quaint. Metal swords, wooden shields, and simple formations that reminded the Corvan cadets of their own ancestral traditions. These are Roman legions. Approximately 2,000 Earth years ago, Professor Veltar explained. The humans marched in perfect rectangular formations, their discipline impressive even by galactic standards. Cadet Zixara leaned forward with interest. Their coordination is actually quite good for primitives. Look how they maintain formation. But then the battle began. The cadets watched in growing confusion as the Roman formation crashed into enemy lines. What disturbed them was not the violence itself, but how the humans responded to it. When the frontline soldiers fell, those behind them simply stepped over the bodies and continued fighting. When men were wounded, they kept attacking until they physically could not move. "Professor," Cadet Thrix called out, her voice wavering slightly. "Why are they not retreating when the tactical situation becomes unfavorable?" Before Veltar could answer, the display shifted to another battle. Viking warriors charged across a field, roaring battle cries as arrows fell around them. Several were struck down, but the others actually seemed to become more aggressive. Cadet Brixton's ears flattened against his head. This makes no sense. They are advancing into enemy fire positions. Any rational commander would order a tactical withdrawal. The footage continued with scenes that defied everything the cadets understood about logical conflict resolution. Japanese samurai fought with such intensity that they seemed oblivious to mortal wounds. Medieval knights charged into certain death rather than surrender strategic positions. "These humans," whispered Cadet Morgax, his tentacles writhing nervously. "They appear to prefer death over defeat." The display moved forward in time, showing increasingly sophisticated weapons and larger conflicts. The cadets saw musket formations where humans stood in neat lines, shooting at each other across open fields. Even when half their comrades fell, the survivors maintained formation and continued firing. In most species, Professor Veltar observed, his crystalline form seeming dimmer than usual. Survival instinct overrides aggressive impulses when casualties exceed 30%. Human military doctrine appears to function differently. Cadet Drixka clicked his mandibles nervously. His shellback species were known for their defensive capabilities, but even they would retreat when facing overwhelming odds. "Professor, what is their casualty threshold? When do they typically withdraw from untenable positions?" The answer came in the form of new footage. World War I trenches appeared in the holographic display, showing conditions that made several cadets gasp audibly. Humans lived in muddy ditches for months, surrounded by the bodies of their fallen comrades. They ate moldy food, slept in standing water, and endured constant artillery bombardment. "This is madness," Cadet Nixara said softly. Her graceful Salanti nature was deeply disturbed by the images of humans crawling through mud and barbed wire. Why do they remain in such conditions? Any reasonable species would negotiate a settlement. Then came the footage of humans going over the top. The cadets watched in stunned silence as thousands of humans climbed out of their protective trenches and ran directly into machine gun fire. Wave after wave fell, but more kept coming. "They are running toward the weapons," Frick said in disbelief. "They can see their comrades dying, but they continue advancing." The Etherian cadet began hyperventilating through her breathing slits. Her telepathic sensitivity made her feel echoes of the desperation and determination that had driven those long-dead humans. The emotional resonance was overwhelming. Professor Veltar paused the display. "Cadet Thrix, would you like to be excused from today's lesson?" She shook her head, though her pale blue skin had taken on an almost white appearance. "I need to understand this. How can any species maintain such psychological states during combat?" The footage resumed with scenes from World War II. The cadets saw humans fighting in frozen wastelands where the temperature would kill most galactic species within minutes. They watched humans continue operations in desert heat that should have been fatal. Jungle warfare showed humans adapting to environments full of diseases and predators. "Look at their faces," Cadet Vexrian observed, his harmonic voice carrying a note of disturbed fascination. They are not mindless with battle fury. They are calculating, tactical, but still advancing into situations with near-certain fatality rates. The display showed the siege of Stalingrad. For months, humans fought over individual buildings, sometimes fighting floor by floor. When they ran out of ammunition, they fought with knives. When they ran out of knives, they fought with broken bottles and bare hands. Several cadets began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The shellbacks, despite their martial traditions, had never encountered warfare that continued past the point of rational victory conditions. "Professor," called out Cadet Eurixta, one of the peaceful luminari, whose species glowed softly when distressed. "What motivated these humans to continue fighting when victory appeared impossible?" "That," Veltar replied, "is what makes human psychology so unique. They seem to fight not for tactical advantage, but for abstract concepts they call honor, freedom, and survival of their group. These motivations appear to override individual preservation instincts." The footage shifted to show resistance movements. The cadets watched humans living in forests and underground tunnels, conducting sabotage operations against occupying forces. Even when captured and tortured, many refused to reveal information about their comrades. "This is unprecedented," Morgak said, his philosophical nature struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. "They are choosing prolonged suffering over survival. In my species, such behavior would be considered evidence of mental illness." The most disturbing footage came next. Humans who had been wounded in battle, sometimes missing limbs or suffering from severe injuries, returned to combat as soon as they were physically able. The cadets saw footage of human pilots with burned faces climbing back into aircraft, of soldiers with bandaged wounds returning to their units. "They treat warfare as if it were their natural state," observed Cadet Zrixel, the analytical cyberborn whose species processed conflict through pure logic algorithms. "Most species view combat as an aberrant situation to be resolved quickly. These humans appear to view extended conflict as normal." By this point, nearly a quarter of the cadets had begun showing signs of species-specific stress responses. The Etherians were having difficulty breathing. The Luminari were glowing brighter with anxiety. And several of the more peaceful species had begun unconsciously edging toward the exits. The footage concluded this section with scenes of human celebrations after victories. The disturbing part was not the celebration itself, but how quickly the humans returned to normal behavior. They would joke, laugh, and socialize as if the extreme violence they had just participated in was simply another aspect of daily life. "Professor," Thrix managed to ask, though her voice was barely above a whisper, "is this behavior normal for their entire species, or just their military personnel?" Veltar's crystalline features reflected the light from the display as he prepared to show them the answer. "I'm afraid, Cadet Thrix, that this is simply how humans respond to threats. Military training appears to simply refine existing psychological tendencies rather than create new ones." The implications of this statement hung heavy in the lecture hall. Several more cadets quietly gathered their belongings and left. Those who remained did so with growing unease, beginning to understand that they were not simply studying primitive warfare tactics, but examining the psychology of a species that might be fundamentally different from anything the galaxy had encountered before. The next section of footage was about to begin, and Professor Veltar could see the tension building among his remaining students. What they had seen so far was disturbing enough, but the truly shocking revelations were still to come. Professor Veltar hesitated for a moment, his 4 crystalline hands hovering over the controls. About 30 cadets had already left the lecture hall, their various species unable to process what they had witnessed. Those who remained sat in uncomfortable silence, many showing visible signs of distress. "The next section of human military history," Veltar announced slowly, documents what they call modern warfare. I must warn you that the psychological implications become significantly more disturbing. The holographic display activated again, showing humans in more recent conflicts. The technology was more advanced, but what horrified the cadets was how the humans had integrated their natural aggression with sophisticated weapons and tactics. Special forces operations appeared on screen. Small teams of humans infiltrated heavily defended positions, moving through enemy territory for days without support. What disturbed the alien observers was not the stealth or skill involved, but the complete acceptance of almost certain death that these humans displayed. Observe their mission parameters, Veltar pointed out. Success rates for these operations rarely exceeded 40% survival for the infiltrating teams. Yet volunteers for such missions far exceeded available positions. Cadet Brixton's whiskers trembled as he watched humans rappelling from aircraft into hostile territory. They are volunteering for missions with 60% fatality rates. This contradicts every evolutionary survival principle. The footage shifted to show resistance movements during various occupations throughout human history. The cadets watched in growing horror as civilians transformed into combatants. Elderly humans taught children how to make weapons from household items. Mothers fought invading soldiers with kitchen knives to protect their offspring. In galactic civilization, observed Cadet Morgax, his tentacles writhing anxiously, civilian populations typically accommodate occupying forces to minimize casualties. These humans appear to view resistance as preferable to survival. What came next broke something fundamental in several cadets' understanding of rational behavior. The display showed human prisoners of war attempting to escape from detention facilities. Not just once, but repeatedly. Even when recaptured and punished, they would try again. Professor, Cadet Vex Rian's harmonic voice carried a note of genuine confusion. Why do they continue escape attempts when the punishment clearly outweighs any possible benefit? According to human psychological profiles, Veltar replied, consulting his datapad. They appear to view continued resistance as more important than personal safety or comfort. The most disturbing footage was yet to come. The display showed what humans called last stands throughout their history. At the Alamo, fewer than 200 humans faced several thousand enemies and chose to fight to the death rather than surrender. At Thermopylae, 300 Spartan warriors held a mountain pass against overwhelming odds. Knowing they would die, Cadet Zixara watched with growing horror as the humans at these battles made conscious decisions to continue fighting when surrender would have saved their lives. They are choosing death over survival. This is not rational behavior. This is not even instinctual behavior. This is insanity. The Corvan cadets' proud warrior heritage had always emphasized honor in battle, but even Corvan warriors would retreat when victory became impossible. The idea of deliberately choosing death over tactical withdrawal was incomprehensible. Thrix had begun making soft, whimpering sounds through her breathing apparatus. Her Etherian empathic abilities were picking up the emotional resonance of long-dead human determination, and the intensity was overwhelming her. Nervous system. Then came the footage that would haunt many of the cadets for years afterward. World War II Pacific theater operations showed humans fighting on small islands, continuing combat even when cut off from supplies and reinforcements. They ate tree bark, drank rainwater, and made weapons from scrap metal. Look at their physical condition, Professor Voltar noted grimly. Severe malnutrition, disease, infected wounds that would disable most species. Yet they maintain combat effectiveness. The cadets watch humans with broken bones continue fighting. Soldiers with severe burns refused medical evacuation. Marines with dysentery held defensive positions for weeks. This cannot be normal behavior. Cadet Drixka insisted, his shellback armor plates clattering as he shifted nervously. No species can maintain combat effectiveness under such physical degradation. But the footage proved otherwise. Humans not only maintained effectiveness, they seemed to become more dangerous as conditions worsened. Cornered and desperate, they fought with creativity and ferocity to defy galactic military doctrine. The breaking point for many cadets came when the display showed human kamikaze operations. Pilots deliberately flew their aircraft into enemy ships, turning themselves into guided missiles. They weaponized their own deaths, Cadet Nixara whispered, her graceful Salanthi form shaking visibly. They turned suicide into a tactical advantage. The philosophical implications were staggering. Every known galactic species viewed individual life as the highest value, with survival instincts that overrode almost every other consideration. The idea of deliberately ending one's own life as a military tactic was beyond comprehension. More cadets began filing toward the exits. Some were physically ill, others were showing signs of species-specific panic responses. The Luminary cadets were glowing so brightly with distress that they were casting shadows in the lecture hall. Those who remained watched footage of human civilians during bombing campaigns. Instead of fleeing or surrendering, they emerged from ruins to continue daily activities. They held weddings in destroyed churches, taught school in bomb buildings, and maintained social functions while under constant attack. Professor, Morgax managed to say, his philosophical nature struggling with concepts that challenged basic assumptions about sentient behavior. How did this species survive long enough to develop space travel? Their psychological tendencies should have led to self-extinction. Valtar's crystalline features dimmed as he consulted his data. According to our xenobiological analysis, these same psychological traits that we find disturbing were actually evolutionary advantages on their homeworld. Earth apparently produced multiple competing intelligent species, and humans survived by being more willing to fight to extinction than their competitors. The implications sent a chill through the remaining cadets. This was not aberrant behavior for humans. This was their natural state, refined by millions of years of evolution. The final piece of footage in this section showed modern human urban warfare. The cadets watched as humans fought building by building through destroyed cities, using tactics that turned civilian infrastructure into weapons. They saw humans adapt instantly to new threats, developing countermeasures for enemy tactics within hours. Notice their learning curve? Valtar observed. Most species require extensive analysis and training to develop new tactical responses. Humans appear to innovate combat solutions in real time during active conflict. Cadet Eurixtha, whose Luminary species had never experienced violence in their recorded history, began glowing so brightly that other cadets had to shield their optical sensors. Professor, this is not just warfare. This is systematic, organized, enthusiastic violence. They appear to enjoy conflict. The display showed human soldiers during brief periods between battles. Instead of the trauma responses that most species would exhibit, the humans were often laughing, joking, and sharing stories about their combat experiences. They treated extreme violence as if it were an interesting hobby. They have normalized the abnormal, Vexrian observed, his harmonic voice carrying undertones of deep disturbance. They have made extreme violence into a cultural institution. By this point, the lecture hall had emptied to less than half its original occupancy. Those who remained did so with visible effort, their various species stress responses pushing them toward flight, but their academic dedication keeping them in there. Seats. Professor Veltar looked around at his remaining students and made a decision that would affect galactic military doctrine for generations to come. Cadets, he said quietly, what we have observed thus far represents human warfare during their pre-space age. The final section of today's presentation will show you how these psychological traits manifest when combined with advanced technology. The remaining cadets exchange glances filled with dread. If this was how humans behaved with primitive weapons, what would they be capable of with energy weapons, spacecraft, and galactic-level resources? None of them were prepared for the answer, but all of them understood that they were about to witness something that would change their understanding of what intelligent species were capable of. The lecture hall felt cavernous now, with only 47 cadets remaining from the original 112. Those who stayed did so with grim determination, though their various species showed clear signs of psychological stress. Professor Veltar looked around at the diminished audience and felt a responsibility he had never experienced in decades of teaching. "The final section," he announced, his crystalline voice carrying a weight that made several cadets shift nervously, "documents human warfare from their achievement of spaceflight to present day. What you are about to see represents the psychological patterns we have observed, but enhanced with technology comparable to our own." The holographic display activated, showing sleek human spacecraft engaged in what the documentation labeled asymmetric warfare. Unlike the organized fleet battles that galactic species typically conducted, these humans seemed to fight with no recognizable pattern. Cadet Brixton leaned forward, his Corvan military instincts trying to analyze the tactical formations. "Professor, where are their battle lines? Their command structure? This appears to be chaos." "That," Veltar replied grimly, "appears to be intentional. Human military doctrine calls it guerrilla warfare in space. Small units operating independently, striking without warning, then disappearing into asteroid fields or gas giant atmospheres." The footage showed human fighters emerging from inside hollowed-out asteroids, attacking supply convoys, then vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. What disturbed the cadets was not the tactics themselves, but the apparent ease with which humans adapted to living in conditions that would drive most species insane. "They are surviving for months in deep space," observed Cadet Morgax, his tentacles curling tightly around his support harness. "Isolated from their own kind, in vehicles barely large enough for one being, conducting solo operations in the void." Thrix made a soft keening sound through her breathing apparatus. Her Etherean telepathic abilities were detecting something that the others could not see directly. "Professor, these humans in the footage, they are not just surviving isolation. They appear to be thriving in it." The display shifted to show human ground operations on hostile worlds. Unlike galactic military protocols that emphasized environmental suits and protective bases, these humans seemed to adapt directly to alien conditions. They fought in methane atmospheres, on worlds with crushing gravity, and in radiation levels that should have been fatal. "Observe their biological adaptations," Veltar noted, highlighting sections of the footage. Rather than relying primarily on technology for environmental protection, they appear to use genetic modification and cybernetic enhancement to become compatible with hostile environments. Cadet Drixka clicked his mandibles in disbelief. They are modifying their own biology for tactical advantage. Most species consider genetic integrity sacred. Humans, the professor replied, appear to consider tactical effectiveness more important than biological purity. The footage showed human soldiers who had been modified to breathe different atmospheric compositions, to see in spectrums that would blind normal humans, and to survive in temperatures that would freeze or boil most organic compounds. But what truly disturbed the observers was how casually these humans accepted such modifications. "They volunteer for permanent biological alteration," Cadet Vexrian noted, his harmonic voice carrying overtones of shocked disbelief. "They are treating their own bodies as equipment to be modified for mission requirements." The display showed urban combat on a dozen different worlds, each with unique environmental challenges. The humans fought in underwater cities, in the metallic corridors of space stations, and in the crystal formations of silicon-based worlds. In every environment, they adapted their tactics to use local conditions as weapons. Look at this sequence. Professor Veltar highlighted a particular battle. They have weaponized the atmosphere itself. By introducing specific chemical compounds, they turned the air into a corrosive agent against their enemies while protecting themselves with temporary biological modifications. Cadet. Eurix's luminary glow had shifted from bright anxiety to a dim, horrified flicker. Professor, they are not just fighting in alien environments. They are turning the environments themselves into weapon systems. The footage continued with examples that defied everything the cadets understood about civilized warfare. Humans used psychological warfare that included broadcasting enemy communications frequencies with sounds that induced panic in different species. They deployed biological agents specifically tailored to target alien nervous systems while leaving their own troops unaffected. This is not honorable combat, Cadet Zixara said quietly, his Corvan warrior pride struggling with concepts that violated every principle of martial honor his species valued. This is systematic exploitation of species-specific vulnerabilities. More disturbing, added Morgax, is their apparent ability to research and develop such weapons during active conflict. Most species require years of laboratory research to understand alien physiology. These humans seem to develop countermeasures in the field. The display showed footage of human combat medics treating alien prisoners with the same efficiency they used to treat their own wounded. But the cadets noticed something that chilled them. The medics were simultaneously studying their patients, gathering biological data that would later be used to develop more effective weapons against those same species. They learn from every interaction, Thrix observed, her empathic abilities picking up the cold calculation behind human compassion. Every act of mercy is also an intelligence-gathering operation. The most disturbing footage came next: modern human special operations. The cadets watched as small teams of humans infiltrated alien facilities by perfectly mimicking the behavior and appearance of the native species. Using temporary genetic modifications and advanced psychology, they became indistinguishable from their targets. Perfect infiltration, whispered Cadet Nixara. They are not just adapting to alien environments, they are becoming alien species temporarily. The tactical implications were staggering. How could any species maintain security when potential enemies could become biologically identical to trusted personnel? But the footage that finally broke the remaining cadets' composure showed human child soldiers. Not children forced into combat, but young humans who volunteered for military service and excelled in it. The display showed teenagers operating complex weapon systems, conducting stealth operations, and displaying the same casual acceptance of extreme violence that characterized adult humans. Their offspring, Morgax said in a voice barely above a whisper, are being trained for warfare from early development. This is not emergency conscription. This is systematic cultivation of military psychology from childhood. Several more cadets quietly gathered their belongings and left. The concept of deliberately training young members of a species for combat violated fundamental galactic principles about protecting developing minds. Those who remained watched footage of human civilians during recent conflicts. Rather than seeking safety or evacuation, many actively supported military operations. Elderly humans provided intelligence, civilian engineers designed weapons, and family groups worked together to manufacture explosives. The distinction between civilian and military populations appears to be largely meaningless, Professor Veltar observed. Every human seems to be a potential combatant. The final piece of footage showed something that would haunt the remaining cadets for the rest of their careers. modern human space marines training for boarding operations. These soldiers were modified to survive in vacuum, equipped with weapons that could penetrate any known armor, and trained to fight in zero gravity with lethal efficiency. But what truly terrified the observers was watching these Marines during their rest periods. Between training sessions that would traumatize most species, they laughed, played games, and socialized as if preparing for extreme violence was simply another job. They have made warfare into a profession, Cadet Zrixel noted, his cyberborn analytical processes struggling to comprehend the psychology involved. Not a regrettable necessity, not a temporary emergency response, but a career choice that they appear to enjoy. Cadet Brixton spoke what many were thinking. Professor, these are not soldiers in the way we understand the term. These are professional killers who happen to work for a government. The footage ended with scenes of human veterans sharing stories of their combat experiences. The disturbing part was not that they remembered violence, but that they spoke of it fondly, as if recalling pleasant memories from an interesting vacation. Professor, Thrix asked in a voice that trembled despite her efforts at control, when humans achieve victory in these conflicts, how do they treat conquered populations? Veltar hesitated before answering. According to our diplomatic reports, humans are surprisingly effective at post-conflict integration. They appear to separate the violence of warfare from their peacetime interactions with former enemies. This information, rather than providing comfort, made the situation even more disturbing. These humans could apparently switch between extreme violence and normal diplomacy as easily as changing clothes. They compartmentalize warfare, Morgax observed. The holographic display faded to black, leaving the lecture hall in relative darkness, except for the soft blue illumination that always bathed the Academy's chambers. Professor Veltar stood motionless at his podium, his crystalline form reflecting the ambient light in fractured patterns. 23 cadets remained in their seats, each representing a different species, all united by the shared trauma of what they had witnessed. The silence stretched for several minutes. No one seemed willing to break it, as if speaking would make the images they had seen somehow more real. Finally, Professor Veltar activated the room's normal lighting and faced his remaining students. Cadets, he began, his voice carrying a heaviness that none of them had ever heard before. What we have observed today was not simply an academic exercise in primitive warfare studies. This documentation represents the psychological and tactical profile of humanity's most recent diplomatic contact with the Galactic Alliance. Cadet Brixton's ears drooped as the implications settled in. Professor, you are saying these humans are currently active in our galaxy? This was not historical footage of an extinct civilization. 3 days ago, Veltar confirmed, consulting a datapad that seemed to tremble in his crystalline grip. The human government requested permission to establish formal diplomatic relations with the Alliance. Their first cultural exchange vessel is scheduled to dock at this station tomorrow morning. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Cadet Thrix began hyperventilating again through her breathing apparatus, her etherian empathic abilities overwhelmed by the collective fear radiating from her classmates. Professor, Cadet Morgax managed to say, his tentacles writhing in complex patterns that indicated deep philosophical distress. In 7 centuries of Academy doctrine, how do our strategic protocols recommend dealing with a species that cannot be negotiated with through conventional means? Veltar's forearms moved in a gesture that his species used to indicate helplessness. Our entire diplomatic framework is based on the assumption that rational beings will choose survival over destruction when presented with logical alternatives. Human psychology appears to operate outside these parameters. Cadet Drixka's armor plates rattled as he shifted nervously. What happens when a species views death as an acceptable outcome? How do you negotiate with beings who consider extreme violence a normal problem-solving technique? You cannot threaten them with destruction, observed Cadet Vex Ryan, his harmonic voice carrying undertones of genuine terror, because they appear to view their own extinction as simply another tactical option. The philosophical implications were staggering. Every galactic species had achieved space travel through cooperation, logical resource management, and the development of sophisticated conflict resolution systems. The humans seemed to have reached the stars despite maintaining psychological patterns that should have led to self-destruction. Professor, Cadet Eurixtha asked, her luminary glow now so dim it was barely visible. What does our xenobiology department recommend as appropriate diplomatic protocols when interacting with humans? Valtar manipulated his datapad, scrolling through official recommendations that seemed increasingly inadequate given what they had learned. Standard first contact procedures assume peaceful intentions, rational decision-making processes, and species-wide survival instincts. None of these assumptions appear applicable to humanity. Cadet Zixara spoke for the first time since the footage had ended. His Corvan warrior pride had been systematically demolished by witnessing combat techniques that made his species' martial traditions look like children's games. Professor, if humans view warfare as a normal social activity, how do we know their diplomatic mission is genuine? How do we know this is not simply reconnaissance for future military operations? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every cadet in the room was now thinking the same thing. If humans were capable of the deception and violence they had witnessed, how could any species trust their stated intentions? Our intelligence analysis suggests, Veltar said carefully, that human diplomatic proposals are genuine. However, they also indicate that humans view diplomacy and warfare as complementary activities rather than mutually exclusive options. Cadet Nixar's graceful movements had become jerky and nervous. They maintain military capabilities while conducting peaceful negotiations? Most species disarm as a gesture of good faith during first contact. According to the cultural briefing, Veltar replied, humans consider military preparedness to be a sign of respect for potential allies. They apparently believe that only strong civilizations are worth establishing relationships with. The logic was alien and disturbing. Most galactic species view disarmament as evidence of trustworthiness. Humans seem to view military strength as a prerequisite for honest communication. Professor, Morgax said slowly, his philosophical nature struggling with concepts that violated basic assumptions about civilized behavior. If humans respect only strength, and they define strength in terms of military capability, how does a peaceful species establish meaningful contact with them? Valtar's crystalline features seemed to darken as he considered the question. That, Cadet Morgax, is the challenge our diplomatic corps is currently struggling to address. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority communication. Valtar accepted the message, and his translator began speaking in the neutral tones used for official announcements. Attention Academy personnel. The Human Cultural Exchange Vessel Friendship has requested permission to dock 12 hours ahead of schedule. The ship carries a delegation of human military historians, diplomatic personnel, and cultural ambassadors. All Academy staff and advanced cadets are invited to attend the welcome ceremony. The irony of the ship's name was not lost on anyone in the room. After witnessing hours of human warfare footage, the word friendship had taken on distinctly ominous connotations. Professor, Cadet Thrix whispered, will attendance be mandatory? Valtar looked at his remaining students, 23 beings from diverse species, all struggling to process what they had learned about humanity's approach to conflict resolution. These cadets would soon become officers in the Galactic Fleet, responsible for making decisions that could affect the safety of billions. Attendance is optional, he replied. However, You are likely to encounter humans in your future careers. Understanding their psychology may prove essential for the survival of galactic civilization. Cadets Rixel's analytical processes were running calculations based on the behavioral patterns they had observed. Professor, based on human historical precedent, what is the statistical likelihood that their expansion into galactic space will result in large-scale conflicts? Valtar consulted his data, though he suspected the answer would provide no comfort. Human history shows an average of one major conflict every 15 to 20 years throughout their recorded civilization. They have never maintained peaceful conditions for more than 30 consecutive years. The mathematics were horrifying. A species that considered regular warfare normal had just gained access to galactic-level resources and technology. Professor, Brixton asked quietly, in your professional opinion, should the Alliance consider humanity a potential threat to galactic security? Valtar looked around the lecture hall, seeing the fear and confusion in his students' expressions. These beings represented the finest young minds from dozens of species, all trained in military strategy and xenobiology. If they were this disturbed by human psychology, how would average galactic civilians react to actual contact with humans? Cadets, he said finally, I believe we are facing something unprecedented in galactic history. Not simply a new species to incorporate into the Alliance, but a fundamental challenge to our understanding of what intelligent civilization means. What should we do? Asked Cadet Rixta, her question echoing what everyone was thinking. We learn, Viltar replied. We adapt. And we hope that human diplomatic intentions are as genuine as their military capabilities are terrifying. Another soft chime indicated an update to the previous message. The translator's neutral voice filled the chamber again. Update. The human delegation has specifically requested to address Academy students about peaceful cooperation between species with different conflict resolution traditions. The presentation will include interactive demonstrations of human diplomatic protocols. Several cadets exchanged glances filled with dark humor. After witnessing human conflict resolution traditions for the past several hours, the idea of interactive demonstrations was not particularly comforting. Professor, Morgak said, voicing what they were all thinking, given what we have observed about human psychology. What exactly constitutes a peaceful demonstration in human cultural terms? Valtar manipulated his controls, preparing to dismiss the class while struggling with the same question. I suppose, cadets, we are about to find out. As the remaining students filed out of the lecture hall, each carried with them a new understanding of the galaxy they inhabited. They had entered the classroom expecting to study primitive warfare tactics as a historical curiosity. They were leaving with the knowledge that the galaxy's newest neighbors might be the most dangerous predators intelligent life had ever produced.